Well, let's get started. It's after 3. We have, I think, 90 minutes of fun-filled discussion. The first half, at least, will be from Najam, and we'll then hopefully have lots of questions and answers. I don't think I have to introduce Najam Sethi. He's the founder and leader of the 2 best papers in Pakistan. I say that just to...
You write for one of them, so you have to say it.
Yeah, I know. But I do want to point out that one of them is the Daily Times, which comes out every day. The other one is the Friday Times, which obviously comes out every Friday. And we have here also with us his lovely wife Jugnu, who runs the back page of the Friday Times. And I've always considered that, since I got to Pakistan all those many years ago, as the best political satire in the English language. So would you just a little bit of applause for Jugnu. Now, Najam is visiting here, and we've been really lucky to get him to the Wilson Center. We frankly were almost late because he was doing television interviews over at a television studio, and we ate lunch on the run, so to speak. But we're glad you're here, Najam. And I think that at least if I could sort of lay out an agenda, I think most of us here know a lot about Pakistan's past and even Pakistan's present, but what we want to know is, extrapolating from the present if you can, we want to know more about Pakistan's future. And so perhaps maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's going on currently, politically, both with the military and with the civilian politicians. Give them a grade, if you will, anywhere from A to D-, and then talk about where you think it's heading. And because my own view is that Pakistan's probably at a tipping point, and it's not clear to me which way it's going. But I would like, for example, and I will ask this question again at the end, to know what you think the agenda of the government and the army is with regard to the different groups of extremists, Pakistani Taliban, Afghan Taliban, all those jihadists who hang out mostly in Punjab, and whether or not we can expect at some point in the future to see most of them under control or not. And so forth and so on. And where you might think we might be going in terms of governance with respect to the military-civil relations. And you can probably find a lot of other things to talk about. So I think, I should have introduced myself, but I'm not going to, I should have told you all about the Wilson Center, which most chairmen who hang out at the Wilson Center are supposed to tell you about how it's a living monument to President Wilson, created by Congress, and so forth and so on. But I'll do that afterwards if anybody wants to ask a question. I'm going to turn the floor over to Najam Sethi.
Thank you, Bill. It's always a pleasure to come to Washington, and of course, this is not the first time I'm here at the Wilson Center. I have lots of friends here. I'm very comfortable in Washington and with all our friends, and it's wonderful to exchange views because this is, of course, where it all happens, or should happen. Bill and I go back a long way, and in some senses, the subject of today's talk, challenges facing Pakistan, reminds me of a time exactly 10 years ago when I read a short paper at the National Defence College, now the National Defence University in Islamabad, which is the Army's think tank, where I was commended for talking about the challenges facing Pakistan. I had mentioned 6 or 7 challenges facing Pakistan. And subsequently, I gave the same lecture at a forum in India on India-Pakistan relations. And when I got back, Mr. Nawaz Sharif decided to put me into prison for talking about the challenges facing Pakistan. And Bill played a major role in leaning on the then government of Pakistan to set me free. So both the challenges facing Pakistan and my host today, we go back a long way. Challenges facing Pakistan. It's interesting that when General Musharraf took over, shortly, about 4 or 5 months after I'd given my lecture on the challenges facing Pakistan, General Musharraf took over, and in his first or second speech, I think, his first major speech to the nation, he talked of the challenges facing Pakistan and the reform agenda that he had in mind. And I was heartened to know that basically he'd summarized exactly what I'd said 5 months earlier. So clearly the army had a position, and they agreed with my assessment of it. They agreed when I mentioned it in the National Defence University, and then when Musharraf took over as well. But of course, many things have happened since then, and I was very depressed and subsequently when I felt that Musharraf had abandoned the reform agenda. And then, of course, he began to get into his stride, and I was hopeful again until he began messing up in 2007. Despite loads of good advice that he got, but unfortunately, he was not in a listening mood. And so, if talking about challenges facing Pakistan got me into trouble then and got Musharraf into trouble 2 years ago, he's sitting in exile in London. I hope today's discussion of the challenges facing Pakistan will not get me into trouble again. Having said that, I've made no notes about what we're going to talk about. So, as Bill said, a little bit about what's going on and a little bit about what's likely to happen in the next 12 months or so, and then lots of questions and answers and, joint digging in to find out where we are. What's going on? Well, we've just done a review of President Zardari's first year in office as president. And as it so happened, he became president about a year ago, and it's coincided his anniversary with that of 9/11. And in many ways, 9/11 is still, in a sense, running the agenda of Pakistan and of President Zardari. But I'll come to that in a minute. Zardari has not done well in his first year. He's made a lot of mistakes, some of which are still clinging to him. And if I can just tick them off, I remember in a meeting with Zardari after the elections, I said to him, make an alliance with the Pakistan Muslim League Q, which is the rump pro, the old Musharraf party. And that was the old agenda that Musharraf had in mind. And I said, you ought to stick to it because that is what Bibi wanted to do. And that's a safe bet. People won't like it because that's a discredited party. But for political reasons, you ought to stick close to it. He said, no. We've got to bury the past. We have to work with Nawaz Sharif. And that relationship never got anywhere. Nawaz lent him some ministers and then pulled them out, and then insisted on fulfillment of pledges that Mr. Zardari had made vis-a-vis the restoration of the judiciary and on implementing a charter of democracy that he and that Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto had signed in London 2 years earlier. And Zardari's discreditation began from day one. And by the time Nawaz Sharif was ready to launch a movement for the restoration of the judiciary, Zardari was really down in the dumps. And the tragedy is that even at that late stage, when he could have salvaged the situation, he did not. He allowed the Prime Minister to get the credit for that, and the army to get the credit for it, and America to get the credit for it, instead of realizing which way the wind was blowing and backtracking and accepting the restoration of the judiciary with good faith. Which is to say that he made the mistake of a wrong political alliance. He made the mistake of wasting time. He then made the mistake of riling the Pakistan army. Mumbai happened, and Zardari was keen to make amends with India and went overboard in a sense as far as the army was concerned in trying to build peace. He said some things which the army didn't like. They were quite undiplomatic. They were good things, but they were undiplomatic. And then he tried to, in a sense, get a grip over the ISI. The army didn't like that either. And he had to beat a retreat on all these fronts. So his relationship with the army was a bit troubled from day one. And then, of course, having got rid of Musharraf, he had to rebuild a relationship with General Kiani. And I think that is still work in progress. And that's the best that one can say about it. Zardari's relationship with the army is work in progress. The army has lots of question marks about Mr. Zardari's ability to run government, to provide, and also to deal with the United States. The Pakistani army thinks that Mr. Zardari is soft on the US, and the Pakistani army would like to take a harder line vis-a-vis its negotiating position on Afghanistan and the war on terror. And Mr. Zardari is more inclined to look at the money side of it. He wants to put money into the budget. He wants money from the United States. He wants to get the economy moving, but the army has other priorities. So there is this problem that continues to dog Mr. Zardari. The second is his relationship with Nawaz Sharif. It's not good. Nawaz Sharif would ideally like to push him over to get a midterm election going. He denies it furiously if you ask him on record. But the fact of the matter is that I don't personally think he's going to be ready to face another 4 years in opposition. And his strategy has been to diminish Zardari, drive a wedge between Zardari and his prime minister, and weaken Zardari, to discredit him as a man with a corrupt past, to run down his government, which is pretty incompetent and doesn't really need much running down. It helps itself. And so Nawaz has succeeded in turning the public perception and the media against Mr. Zardari and the People's Party government. So he's really hemmed in from all sides. He wants to build peace with India. The army is saying, take it easy. And the Indians are not helping. The Indians are putting all manner of preconditions on the resumption of the composite dialogue, and this is not helping him at all. The second thing is his relationship with the army is not good. It's not bad, but it's not good either. He has to constantly watch over his shoulder. His relationship with the media is bad. The media does not like him. The media is highly critical of Mr. Zardari, often with good reason, but not always with good reason. And, of course, the opposition has got the public on its side. So all in all, on all these fronts, it's not a good situation. Having said that, you have to give the man some credit. And the credit is due on the following 4 areas, which are very important from my point of view. And I think in terms of the challenges facing Pakistan, they're far more important than the earlier negative points that I've mentioned. And one is that he rightly thinks that the solution to many problems will lie in a revival of the economy. And he desperately wants to get that going, which is why he's trying to be a little soft towards the United States and its demands, which is why he wants to build peace with India and, in fact, get on with trading. And I think so that's one very important thing. He's keen to get the economy moving. The second important thing is that he is keen to redress the civil-military imbalance. And on that, he has Nawaz Sharif on his side. Recently, many of you will have read about press reports in Pakistan about some -1 formula that is in the offing, meaning somehow diminish Zardari, strengthen the Prime Minister, i.e. Pakistan without Zardari, or a weak Zardari. This reminds you of the -2 formula that was attempted in Bangladesh and which did not work. I think there are elements in the ruling establishment in the army that want to see Zardari weak, but not necessarily out. Nawaz would like to see him out if he can't just simply weaken him. But having said that, I don't think it's going to happen. And I tell you it's not going to happen for 2 reasons. -1 means Zardari having to voluntarily or under pressure give up the presidency, or become a puppet president, or become a very, very weak president. I don't think Zardari would allow that to happen now, especially when there are rumors and conspiracy theories afoot that that might be used as an attempt to finally weaken the People's Party. He is the leader of the People's Party. The party responds to him. he sees his value in the political system, and he's insisting that his son Bilawal constantly come back from his holidays in Oxford, to come back and sit with the father, tour Sindh, and to whip up the Bhutto factor all over again. So he's protecting himself by keeping his son close to him. The second thing is that the Prime Minister does not really have a constituency. And although there are people who are trying to tell the Prime Minister that the army is your constituency, he's not so stupid as to realize that the army is his constituency. At the end of the day, if there's a replacement of Zardari, it will have to be Nawaz Sharif. It can't be the army. There is no mood in the country for an army takeover or for the army to come back. That is not on at all. Now, having said that, the army also has apprehensions about Mr. Nawaz Sharif. The army thinks that Mr. Zardari is a bit of a weak man. Army thinks Zardari is inexperienced. The army thinks he's not to be trusted, and so on. But vis-a-vis Nawaz Sharif, they have other problems. Nawaz Sharif's track record vis-a-vis the army is not terribly good. And the army has a long memory. And Nawaz Sharif's current position also on wanting to try Musharraf is something that the army does not like. And so a -1 would really effectively, if it were to get anywhere, would have to be a -2, which means no Zardari and no Nawaz Sharif. I mean, that's going to be very difficult to manipulate. And therefore, I think that Zardari is not going to allow Gilani to get on with it and to become an independent player. Should he see that something like that is afoot, he will turn the party against Mr. Gilani. So Mr. Gilani will have to watch his shoulder, because without the People's Party, Mr. Gilani is a nobody. Similarly, Nawaz, for the exit of Nawaz Sharif from the equation, either some very drastic physical measures will have to be taken, or he will have to be persuaded, and there's no way Nawaz is going to be persuaded. Certainly there's no way he's going to allow the Muslim League leadership to fall into the lap of his younger brother Shahbaz Sharif, whom the army likes, because he's a bit of a bureaucrat. But Nawaz is a popular man. Nawaz is the populist. Shahbaz is not. So Nawaz will not allow Shahbaz to be his heir apparent, and Zardari will not allow Gilani to do that. So no -1. -1 means -2. -2 is impossible, very difficult, without all manner of physical disruption. Having said that, Nawaz and Zardari have both agreed on one point, that the army has to be pushed back. The army should play no major role in political decision-making in the future. But that's easier said than done, especially if Nawaz Sharif is in a hurry to get back into an election. Because there's no way Nawaz can get back into a new election, midterm election, without intervention by the army to pave the way, as it were, for that thing to happen. And I don't see that happening. A lot of people may wish for it, but it's not going to happen. Unless there are factors that we can't think about right now, we can't factor those in. Zardari is going to be able to survive this period. Short of a war with India, which could be very destabilizing for the entire region, or an unexpected assassination, I don't foresee any midterm change in Pakistan. The best thing that could happen to Pakistan, of course, would be for a revival of the economy, for a resolution of its, or some of its problems with India in the next 3 or 4 years, and for, of course, a movement towards a long-term solution that satisfies the Pakistani army and also America's agenda in Afghanistan. And now those are the challenges that Pakistan is faced with. The first challenge is to make sure that this government lasts the full term. We need to have a civilian government complete its full term. The last government was a semi-civilian government. Musharraf was still in charge. It did complete its term. But we need to have, for the sake of democracy and for the sake of the civil-military imbalance, to get the balance right, we need for one civilian government to complete its term, for good or for bad. Number one. Number two, we need to revive the economy. Without a revival of the economy, nothing is going to be gained. There's going to be increasing impoverishment, there's going to be sources of new terrorism, and so on. The third is this business with India. If there is another Mumbai, and there is no guarantee that there will not be another Mumbai, because many of these former non-state actors which became state actors are now also back to their non-state actor role. Some of them are fairly autonomous. India's demand that the composite dialogue cannot be resumed unless and until there is a crackdown on some of these elements is unreasonable. It took 30 years to make these non-state actors effective. They're not going to be disbanded and demilitarized overnight. It will take a long time. And it will take a transition period in which Indo-Pakistan relations have to get into conflict resolution mode. The tragedy is that, while we were prepared to accept India's position before the elections, okay, conditions, do this, do that. If you don't do this, we won't get back to the composite dialogue. It's fairly inexplicable why India is persisting with this position right now. It is hurtful to the cause of democracy in Pakistan. It is hurtful to the cause of Indo-Pak relations. It is hurtful to the cause of finding solutions in Afghanistan, because India, Pakistan are fighting their proxy wars all over the place, and because India already has a huge footprint in North Afghanistan, and the Indian consulates are doing their bit there. Therefore, this is something that India and Pakistan have to come to grips with, and America has to weigh in discreetly, if necessary, to get the dialogue moving again and to get some conflict resolution done. Similarly, the other challenge, of course, is Afghanistan, and with it, the whole challenge of terrorism. Afghanistan is a challenge because the recent elections in Afghanistan, which were supposed to find solutions, have not done so. And the problem seems far more intractable now than it did 6 months ago. And I think a realization is dawning that America's attempt to go it alone with Mr. Karzai is not going to bear fruit. And the signals that are coming from Washington, one half of the administration here is saying we want our boys back. The American public is saying we want our boys back. We don't want to send in more troops. We want results in the next 12 months before the congressional elections. Another half is saying, the one half that's sitting in Afghanistan is saying, send us more troops, and we need to get to grips with the Taliban. The Pakistani army's position is very clear. They want a solution in Afghanistan in which you have an Afghanistan that is friendly, that is peaceful, stable, democratic, but friendly. The word friendly is critical. Those who talk of an Afghanistan that is not friendly to Pakistan, are living in a fool's paradise. The Pakistani army will never allow that to happen, and they are major players in that region. What does the Pakistani army mean when it says friendly Pakistan, friendly Afghanistan? I was talking to Rick Inderfurth, who's just written a paper on the need for a neutral Afghanistan. And although he hasn't spelled out how we are going to end up in a neutral Afghanistan, I think the problem in Pakistan is that Pakistan now fears that religious Pashtun nationalism could lead to the new dismemberment of Pakistan. Either that, or it could mean a new attack on the state. We've just seen how the Taliban came pretty close to creating enormous difficulties for the Pakistani state, and how there was enormous confusion both in the establishment, in parliament, in the media, and amongst the people of Pakistan in terms of what ought to be done and how do you deal with the Taliban. We've got over that hurdle. But at the end of the day, there's not just the Pakistani Taliban to contend with. You have the jihadis who are still there, who've linked up with Al-Qaeda. You have pockets of potential terrorists in Punjab waiting to be recruited. You have Al-Qaeda that is still there, very much there in Waziristan, possibly now moving to the urban centers of Pakistan. And then you have the Afghan Taliban who need to have a representation and a space in Kabul. Mr. Karzai has messed it up for everyone. The idea of a new Loya Jirga that will bring in the Taliban and give space to them is going to be even more difficult now, with Karzai lacking the legitimacy and the Taliban having, in a sense, demonstrated their ability to derail the whole exercise in Afghanistan. And with America in a hurry, results, next year they want results. It's not going to happen. And my assessment is you're going to get no help from the Pakistani army. The Pakistani army has been saying that the Americans don't have the staying power. The Americans are looking after their interests. We Pakistanis have to look after our interests. And our interests certainly, are not helped by Mr. Karzai's insistence on going it the current way. Now there are attempts are underway to bring in the Taliban. The Saudis are in it, the Pakistanis are in it. But if the Taliban come in, then that is a major concession to the Pakistani point of view. And that is something the international community and America have to contend with and have to, in a sense, pave the way for. If you're not going to look at the interests of the Pakistani army and the national security establishment in Pakistan, there will be destabilization in Pakistan, US-Pakistan relations will not work, Pakistan-India relations will not work, nothing will work. The Pakistani army's point of view in terms of a friendly Afghanistan, if not a puppet Afghanistan, has to be taken into account. And my assessment is, so far, the United States has not paid adequate attention to that. And my assessment is, so far, the Indians have not even thought about it. Everybody is thinking of consolidating their own interests there. And after 8 years of war in Afghanistan, today the situation is more bleak than it was after 9/11. And therefore, I think this regional strategy that Mr. Holbrooke and others are working on needs a new think after what has happened in Afghanistan and in terms of the current domestic situation in Pakistan. America needs a long-term engagement, number one, in the region. America also needs to persuade India to work with Pakistan and in both in India-Pakistan relations and in Afghanistan. That's not happened as yet. The third thing is America needs to look at Pakistan's interests, legitimate geostrategic interests in Afghanistan. That America has not yet done. America has been demanding do more in terms of America's immediate interests. And you've seen 8 years down the line, the Pakistani army has been playing games. And they will continue to play these games, and America will not succeed. Pakistan army's interests are legitimate in terms of Afghanistan. The Pakistani army is no longer interested in a Taliban regime in Afghanistan because they now know that a pure Taliban regime, which was not prepared to listen to them in 2001, is not going to be listening to them now if it's going to be a victorious Taliban regime in Afghanistan. I mean, the danger from such a regime would be, forget the Durand Line. My own assessment is that if you had the Americans walk out of Afghanistan and a resurgent Taliban sitting in Kabul, Pakistan's tribal areas would fall within a year or two, at best. The Taliban would take over, and frontier and Peshawar would be immediately threatened. I remember even when the Taliban were in power, and they were supposed to be the puppets of the Pakistan army, the Taliban refused to settle the Durand Line. Even at that time, Taliban spokesmen and ministers would cross over into the tribal areas and talk openly about how those lands and those Pashtun areas belong to Afghanistan. And that's a situation when that government was dependent on the Pakistani government and military for support. And there was a Northern Alliance sitting there contending for power. If the Taliban now seize Afghanistan, there will be no Northern Alliance. The Taliban are already creating difficulties for the 4,000 German troops up in the north. They're all over the place now. And therefore Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India and Iran and the United States have to sit together. So in that sense, this regional strategy, which is AF-Pak, is not making any sense, which is why you now have President Zardari saying, what is this AF-Pak? Why are you hyphenating us with Afghanistan? If India says you can't hyphenate us with Pakistan, well, you can't hyphenate us with Afghanistan. I think behind that is this attempt to tell the United States of America that, hey, look, you're watching out for your interests, but if you think that we're just going to lie down and take your money and give you your interests in Afghanistan, it's not going to happen. And I think that is also part of Mr. Zardari's dilemma. He needs the money to get the economy moving. We've been hearing about American money now for 2 years. The Kerry-Lugar bill is at least a year old. We still don't see any money on the table. The pledges made, or non-pledges, or commitments, or promises, call them what you will, made in the Friends of Pakistan meeting almost 6 months ago, nowhere in sight. Even the money that was meant for the refugees, only half of that has been forthcoming. And now we have another Friends of Pakistan moot lined up for next week. Zardari talks of a Marshall Plan. There's no understanding of the difficulties Pakistan is facing, not just on its eastern border, but on its western border. India is not listening. Karzai is not listening. The United States is not listening. The army is an important factor of Pakistani life, but we need the civilians to get their act together. They can only do so if the regional players understand the dialectics and help resolve our national security dilemma. It's a very difficult situation out there. I am not optimistic. too many players involved, too many interests involved over here. A lot of this has to give way to find a real solution. And, the solution to Afghanistan lies via Islamabad, but the road to Islamabad lies via New Delhi. And so we really got to shift some of our priorities. New Delhi has to get its act together and move with Pakistan. Pakistan and then Afghanistan, the government have to get their acts together. The Indian and Pakistani proxy wars are spoiling the terrain completely. And there is a mindset in Pakistan, especially in the Pakistani army, that finds this unacceptable. And therefore, when we say we want the composite dialogue with India to continue, to get on with it, we want the back channel activated, we don't want any conditions put on the composite dialogue, we find it inexplicable that a Congress government that is flushed with victory still finds it difficult to get on with it, still is having to defend its commitments made at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt last month, and that the Indian media is not part of the solution, is still part of the problem. Just as the Pakistani media was part of the problem some time ago, the Indian media is still part of the problem. Indian nationalism is still coming in the way. The thing is that if America wants Pakistan to cooperate and find solutions within Pakistan on terrorism, on domestic violence, on the economy, then we need peace on our borders. We can't have peace on our borders if the first thought that comes to India is, if there's another Mumbai. If there's another Mumbai, what then? When Mumbai happened, a week later I was in India and the Indians were talking about strikes. Yeah. And I said to them, what are you talking about? You can't have strikes. You just got to lump it. This is the way it is. You got to work together and make sure that this doesn't happen again. And they were, floundering. They were all over the place. What could they do? The nuclear deterrence is alive and kicking. It's in place. And therefore, if another Mumbai happens, what does India do? Nothing. India can't do anything. If India does something, we are in very deep trouble. Therefore, we have to find a solution that makes sure, A, that Mumbai doesn't happen. And if it does, because there are lots of non-state actors out there who are not listening to the Pakistani military and even less so to the Pakistani opposition and Pakistani government, what if another Mumbai happens? What will India do? Will this dialogue be derailed forever? Will the terrorists succeed in driving that wedge? Will the terrorists stop the road from Delhi to Islamabad and the road from Islamabad to Kabul? And the thing is that the Pakistani army has had temporary success. Let's not misunderstand that. It's a very short-term temporary reprieve in Swat and in the settled areas. Those guys have just, 1,000 casualties to the Taliban is neither here there. Nothing. It doesn't mean anything. They just evaporated. Where have they evaporated to? They'll come back. You've got to keep the army there for 10 years. You've got to then build that whole infrastructure. And then you have to get the Afghan Taliban back into Kabul. You can't keep them in Waziristan so that their alliance with Al-Qaeda sticks, and then they're able to build the bridges with the Pakistani Taliban, and the Pakistani Taliban with the Pakistani former jihadists. Therefore, it is very important that in terms of the challenges facing Pakistan, Pakistan is the core state here. And if the states of the region, Iran, Afghanistan and India, do not understand that everything hinges on the rise and fall of Pakistan, everything for the whole region hinges on that, then we will all be in very serious trouble. Therefore, the challenges facing Pakistan are the challenges facing India, the challenges facing the United States, and the challenges facing Afghanistan. Thank you.
Wow. Well, I see hands shot up immediately, Najam, so you provoke some questions.
Well, it was a bit rambling, but I thought...
I didn't think you were too rambling, actually. And I've got a whole bunch of questions myself.
Okay.
But I want to ask perhaps God knows, the cataclysmic question, perhaps. Suppose all of these challenges are not met. What really happens? Does the military come back at some point because Pakistan is ungovernable by civilians?
Well, the military can always come back, but for the military to come back, you need a political situation where there is a demand for the military to come back. Nawaz Sharif was very unpopular when the military took over.
I know.
And Musharraf took the risk even though he knew that he would be an international pariah at that time. The international situation was certainly not conducive to a military takeover. And yet the domestic situation allowed them to take over, and indeed not a tear was shed for the fall of the democratic system. Nawaz and Zardari realized this. But the fact is that, as you mentioned in your book on Bangladesh, the problem with Pakistan and Bangladesh has been that our politicians have been playing a sum-zero game. Zardari's loss is Nawaz Sharif's gain. And if that sort of situation continues, then yes, the military might take over. Now, if the military takes over, my own assessment is that that will probably be the last nail in the coffin. Because, the military has taken over in the past, and every time it's taken over in the past, the United States has been there to give it the economic and military clout it needs for survival. But I think that's not going to happen now, because the military did not want to move into Swat until the public opinion turned, and public opinion compelled the military to move into Swat. The military is extremely reluctant to take on the Taliban. The military, the first thing General Kiani did when there was a civilian dispensation, and he very proudly talks about it. He says, the first thing I did within 7 days of a government in Islamabad, he went and garlanded the Prime Minister and said, the war on terror is all yours. You give the orders. You are the owners of the war on terror. We are not. And the army was the one stumbling factor in in Mr. Zardari's attempt to get an army action in Swat. The army wanted the peace accord. The army's always wanted peace accords. From 2005 onwards, the army's been into peace accords. The army doesn't want its soldiers who are motivated to fight non-Muslims fighting Muslims. And they've had a lot of problems. Even as we speak, military forces, the Khasadas, which is a sort of a local police force recruited by the locals, are refusing to fight the Taliban. They're just refusing to fight the Taliban. They've laid down their weapons and said, we're going home. Now, those are the sort of challenges the army will find. Army is not interested in fighting an internal war. The army wants political solutions. The problem is that the political solutions can only come with the politicians. And therefore, an army takeover is not going to solve anything for Pakistan. And considering that in the old days, whenever an army took over, there was always one party outside, which was anti-establishment, which was the People's Party. They never had to worry about the other party. The other party was always the Muslim League, which was the King's Party. They never had to worry about that. So there was always two sources of legitimacy. One was the United States of America, and the other was the King's Party. Unfortunately, at least one of those is changing now. The King's Party is no longer the King's Party. There's a small rump that is now the King's Party. The main Muslim League is now really the anti-establishment party. It is the true People's Party today. Nawaz Sharif is the man who commands the popular vote. Nawaz Sharif is the man who says no army rule. And when the army takes over, it will now have to contend with the People's Party in opposition and Nawaz Sharif in opposition. Is going to be a hell of a difficult task. As I said, short of some physical solutions, it's going to be very difficult and a very repressive regime. Second, this judiciary is not the old judiciary. This is a judiciary that's born out of a new struggle. This is a highly politicized judiciary. And the interesting thing is, this politicized judiciary is not pro-executive, it is anti-executive. And it is going to be very difficult, if an army takes over, for the army to get a whole coterie of new judges to sign proclamations of new orders and legitimize an army takeover. This judiciary owes a lot to the lawyers' movement and to the people at large. So that's the second factor, which is going to make it difficult for an army regime to last. And the third factor is the media. This media is an independent media, it's a strong media. Often its interests are misplaced, but one thing is absolutely clear. This media is not going to condone an army takeover. This is a strong media, it has its own views, it's very pro-democracy, it is pro the lawyers' movement, and if it is anti-Zardari, it is pro-Nawaz Sharif. Which is to say that three new factors have entered the equation, which the army will have to contend if it thinks of wanting to take over. The new media, the new judiciary, and the new opposition, which is the Muslim League, led by Nawaz Sharif. And therefore, if conditions are created, anarchy is created, and the army wants to come in, it will still need very strong civilian representation, either by a new election or by any other means.
You and I were speaking of failure a bit earlier, which is can be defined many different ways. Are we speaking of a dysfunctional slide into dysfunctionality in this state?
The state is dysfunctional currently. The state has never been terribly functional. It is as dysfunctional, it is more dysfunctional today than it has ever been. Having said that, it's still a very strong state. And the fact that it's dysfunctional means that, okay, it's not getting out to all the people. So the social contract doesn't exist. But purely in terms of the force of the state and the might of the state, is still a very strong state. And that was demonstrated when, the army moved in and used aircraft, guns, tanks, heavy artillery against a guerrilla force. And what did they do? The army did exactly the same thing that America did in Afghanistan. They used their B-52s and their daisy cutters to drive the Taliban out to Pakistan. They didn't win the war. The Pakistani army has done just that. Hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties. They've just done that and they've thrown these guys back. That's not a solution. So there are no military solutions to the war on terror. It has to be a political war. It has to be a war on the economic front. And of course, it needs peace with India for the Pakistani army to understand that its former assets are now acute liabilities, which have to be dismantled step by step over the next 10 years or so.
Okay, I've hogged the situation. Questions. The lady here, and then Marvin Weinbaum in back of her. We've got microphones. Well, that's the... Never mind. Go ahead, Daisy.
Am I the wrong lady?
The three questions and then
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll take the three at a time.
Daisy Schaefer from CSIS. Najam, you make a very strong case that others need to take Pakistan's strategic interests into consideration. I couldn't agree more. But there are two pieces of logic that escaped me. One is, under those circumstances, why does it follow that other countries, such as India, have to swallow what they consider to be their strategic interests in deference to those of Pakistan? I think the same logic would apply to them as well. And secondly, you said it is the Pakistan Army's interest to have a friendly Afghanistan. You don't really define friendly, and the implication is that there's a strong Taliban-esque flavor to that. Even at a time when the Taliban's Pakistani namesakes are actually posing a danger to the state of Pakistan. I don't get how those compute together.
Let's get three at a time.
No, I'll forget.
You'll forget. Okay.
The India factor. Of course, India has to look after its own interests. The point I'm making is that it is in India's interest to build peace with Pakistan. Because if India doesn't build peace with Pakistan, then we will fall into the Mumbai trap. Then India will have to take action. If India takes action, there will be war. If there is war, the war on terror will get lost. And the terrorists will become part of Pakistan's arsenal against India. We saw a glimpse of that when Mumbai happened. The first thing the Taliban did was they said, we are going to stop fighting the Pakistani army, and we're going to come to the border and fight with the Pakistani army against India in the event of an Indian strike. That is the danger of India not defining its interests in a particular way. You see, the thing is that if India wants to get on, India certainly can get on with it. But the fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, India has not chosen Pakistan as a neighbor. But Pakistan is a neighbor with all these problems. And we've got to deal with these problems. And the spillover from these problems is going to hurt India no less. Because although physically it may not hurt India so much, you can think of it, if there's a war between India and Pakistan, India's economy and the whole notion of a resurgent India that is going to be the new emergent power, that's all going to get lost. We're talking nuclear weapons here. And there's no way the Pakistani army is going to allow India to walk in or even to humiliate it. The entire political galaxy of Pakistan, including the people of Pakistan, are going to line up solidly behind the Pakistani army on this one. You know, it took 24 hours. That's all it took for public opinion to change. Public opinion after Mumbai in Pakistan was anti-Taliban and anti-jihadis. I'm in the media. I monitored the media. The media said what has happened in Mumbai is terrible and that it should not happen and that it's a great human tragedy. The Indian media was so hawkish in terms of wanting strikes that when the Pakistani media saw what the Indian media was selling that week, the Pakistani media, it took them 24 hours, 48 hours to become nationalistic and religious. And suddenly the same rhetoric, you found the same rhetoric, which was, oh, we didn't do it. Who knows, the Indians may have done this themselves. You know, the irrationality of the response of the Pakistani media was marked. But it was triggered, and I remember telling Jugnoon, I said, look how great our response is in the Pakistani media. We're talking sensibly. And 2 days later, we were not talking sensibly. And when we were monitoring the Indian media, and the Indian media was going hysterical. So to answer your question, I think India, when India talks about its interests, India needs to see resolution of conflict with Pakistan as part of its interests if it wants to get on. It can leave things as they are, but the net result of leaving things unresolved is before you. And you know, we're not talking of an army of 100,000 people. We're talking of an army and a mindset in Pakistan, a 60-year-old mindset in Pakistan, a national security state that was built on the basis of the enemy without on the border. That's not going to change so quickly. So if there is conflict with India, it will be an all-out conflict. I say that with full responsibility. I don't wish to say it, but I've seen it at very close quarters. How the entire media, the entire opposition, and even the Taliban suddenly folded right behind the Pakistan army on the mere mention of a threat of war with India. Therefore, it is in India's interests also to resolve some of these disputes, build trust with Pakistan, give the new civilian dispensation, both Nawaz Sharif and Asif Zardari, the space and the opportunity to turn some of these things back. They will need space. Therefore, this government needs space. And the best part of this is that Nawaz Sharif is on board. Nawaz wants peace with India. Zardari wants peace with India. They want an end to the Taliban. And this, you can't get anything better than this. This is the first time all this is happening. Therefore, we need to keep Pakistan on the straight and narrow. We need to give Pakistan the space in which its interests can be protected without crumbling from within.
I think Marvin is next, even though the
fact,
lady in front of him was nice enough to pass the mic back.
That was very kind of you. Because I want to ask the question that you didn't respond to with Tazy, because it's exactly the same question.
Sorry,
there seemed to me to be a contradiction here. You were saying it on one hand that the Indian Army has to be given its due, and we learned that due is essentially a Taliban regime in Kabul.
The Pakistan army.
I'm sorry. The Pakistani army, I'm sorry, is a Taliban regime in Kabul. But at the same time, you made a very, I think, impassioned plea here as to why the United States cannot simply walk away from the region.
No, I did not say that.
So please explain
Yes,
that. Yes.
What does, when say General Kiani says that we want an Afghanistan that is friendly, what does he mean? And I buy that. In the old days, we used to talk of Pakhtunkhwa, the demand for the renaming of the Northwest Frontier Province as Pakhtunkhwa. And neither the Pakistani army, nor the People's Party, nor Nawaz Sharif's party was able to deliver on that demand. A simple demand to rename a province in terms of its secular nationalist ethos at that time. The ethos of the National Army Party was secular nationalism. Not able to deliver. What is the situation today? The situation today is that the ethos is for a religious Pakhtunkhwa or Pashtunistan. And that demand is going to be the demand of the Taliban. And that demand is the one demand that worries the Pakistani establishment. And rightly so. We would like the Afghans, the Pashtuns in Afghanistan to look to Kabul. We want the Pashtuns of the Northwest Frontier Province and the tribal areas to look to Islamabad. The last thing we want is for our Pashtuns to look to Kabul or for their Pashtuns to look to Islamabad. We don't want that. That is why the sort of regime we want in Afghanistan is a regime that accepts the legitimacy and validity of this point of view, first of all. That is not to say that it has to be an exclusive Taliban regime as in the past. Perhaps that is no longer possible given the multifaried interests that have now cropped up in Afghanistan over the last 10 years. But that is precisely why when we talk of a regional approach, it should really be a regional approach. It should not be a do more for the United States approach, in which India is not part of the region, in which Iran is not part of the region, in which Central Asia is not part of the region. The regional approach should include Iran and India. It should include conflict resolution with India, so that the proxy wars, of which Afghanistan is the base area, come to an end. You know, we are not threatened with the proxy war in Balochistan. And of course, so what we would like ideally is for the Afghans to sort out Afghanistan with the help of the United States, the United Nations, Iran, India and Pakistan. We cannot accept an unfriendly regime in Afghanistan. A neutral Afghanistan. Now, the real issue is what is neutrality and what is friendly towards Pakistan. You know, the Taliban were very friendly towards Pakistan. But even the old Taliban regime never recognized the Durand Line. The first thing we want is for the Durand Line to be recognized, not just in words, but in deeds. And that's what we mean at the very least when we say we want a friendly Afghanistan.
Najam, this is just a very short question, but I think a pertinent one, which is to understand what your views are about Nawaz Sharif's perception about the Taliban. In the sense that, you know, the feeling that we have as Pakistanis is that whereas the People Party came up front and said, you know, this is not on, this terrorism must be stemmed. On the other hand, Nawaz Sharif was very quiet. You know, he was like sitting on the wall, he was silent. And only when driven to extreme, when, you know, this action happened in Mumbai and later on, you know, the public opinion changed, that did he make any, you know, expression about, you know, this whole thing. So I just felt that what you talked about Nawaz as a potential national leader in the future. My, again, views are that he's more of a Punjab leader and that perhaps in the other provinces he doesn't enjoy that kind of support the People Party does. But I think it's very important to understand what his views are about the way Pakistan should deal with the Taliban. What do you think?
The thing is, Zardari is in the hot seat. He's the one who's having to deal with the army and with America and with India. Nawaz doesn't have to deal with them. The popular opinion in Pakistan was anti-America and pro-Taliban. So Nawaz was cautious. The Americans asked him time and again to support Zardari. Zardari was seen as an extension of Benazir. Remember, Benazir became very unpopular when she said, you know, she's anti-Taliban. She was seen to be very pro-America. You know, this was our war. Pakistanis thought this was not our war, this was America's war. But that has changed now. Because what the situation now is that we say, yes, this is our war. And you know, there's another reason for that, we can go into that. But Nawaz is far more comfortable now openly coming out and saying that the Taliban is the internal existential threat facing Pakistan. But Nawaz cannot say in so many words that only the military force should be used against them. Because at the end of the day, when you use military force, civilians get killed. The third thing is, the Awami National Party, which is a party on the ground in that region, doesn't want military force to be used. They were the biggest obstacle to the use of the military there. And that was at a time when Zardari wanted to use the military. The Americans were pushing for a military solution. Nawaz was silent. And the Awami National Party was opposed to a military solution. Today you have a situation in which the Awami National Party realizes that a long-term military presence is going to be needed for the revival of the political process in those regions. Nawaz sees the validity of the internal existential threat, which is why he's pushing for the peace process with India. He knows that without consolidating peace with India, you cannot really begin to tackle your internal problems. So I think Nawaz is fully on board. He has to watch out for public perceptions and media perceptions. But at the bottom line is he's fully on board.
Lots of questions.
Okay, Stanley Cobra with the Cato Institute. Could you say something about the relationship between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban? And in this regard, also about foreign infiltration, the number of foreigners who are coming in. I read something in the Daily Times recently about 5,000 Uzbeks. So that as well, you know, those two questions, what Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and foreign infiltration, foreign involvement with the Taliban.
Well, you know, The Al-Qaeda was separate from the Taliban. Then Al-Qaeda and the Taliban had an alliance under the Taliban regime. Then Al-Qaeda and Taliban became one when they were all in Waziristan. And then suddenly you had the growth of the Pakistani Taliban. And then you had the growth of the full-fledged nexus network. The jihadi organizations that Musharraf had banned, the Pakistani Taliban, which were criminalized elements that were suddenly got up and acquired power, and then they linked up with the Afghan Taliban, and of course the Afghan Taliban were linked with Al-Qaeda. So it all became a network. The interesting thing is that when 9/11 happened, the perception in the Pakistani military was that there's such a thing as Al-Qaeda and there's such a thing as Afghan Taliban. But there's no such thing as Pakistani Taliban. And as far as the jihadis are concerned, they're not part of the nexus. They're a separate category altogether, and you need to treat them differently, because at that time they were still part of the assets that to be used against India. It only dawned on Musharraf much later, maybe 2 years down the line, that actually it had all developed into a network, and that you could not separate the jihadis from the Pakistani Taliban and the Pakistani Taliban from the Afghan Taliban and Al-Qaeda at the back of it all. That is the current situation. It's one network. Al-Qaeda comprises people from 17, 18 countries. I don't know how many Uzbeks there are, but there's no doubt about it that there are large foreigners from Central Asia sitting up in Waziristan. That is what the Americans tell us, that is what the army tells us. And the fact that whenever you see pictures of Taliban, you see people who covered their faces and their heads, whereas others are, you can see who they are. So, and often when the drones strike, you do know that Central Asians were killed or Arabs were killed. That sort of information we are able to get from the local ground. What is their actual strength? We don't know. Where is Osama? We don't know. My own hunch is that the drones have actually pushed out many Al-Qaeda people from Waziristan into the settled areas, and many Afghan Taliban from those areas into settled areas also, which is why you're finding it more and more difficult to actually get good drone strikes, which take out a lot of Al-Qaeda people. So, it's anybody's guess what sort of numbers you're playing with. There was a time when we thought Baitullah Masood had 30,000 men under arms. We still don't know what the real strength is. They say they've killed 1,200, 1,500 Taliban in this military offensive. My own hunch is many less. What happens is when a drone strikes an area in Waziristan and 4 people are killed, the media says 17 people killed, in 1 Taliban and 16 civilians. But when the military goes and flattens a settlement, because there are 2 Taliban sniping from there, 17 civilians are killed, 2 Taliban are killed, we say 2 civilians killed, 17 Taliban killed. So that's what is happening. So there is a paucity of real data and figures on the ground. We don't know.
We've been pretty heavily weighted on the right for questions. Is anybody on the left? I don't mean ideologically, I mean otherwise. Want to ask a question? There's a hand up.
I guess I want to go back to one of the things you raised at the beginning, your talk, the economy. And I wanted to ask, how can you really get a sustained improvement in the economy without radical reforms in the education system?
Well, the thing is, the reforms in the education system is a long-term issue. You can't press a button and have effective reforms that start delivering in a year. But elections happen every 3 years or 4 years, and you need short-term measures to get the economy moving again. And that's the most important thing. Right now we're down to a 3% rate of growth. Nearly the first quarter is over. We're still negotiating with the IMF. We're still waiting for American money to come in. We're still debating whether this money will come into the government's coffers and be used as part of the budget to be dispensed according to the government's requirements for monetary policy, fiscal policy, all the rest of it, or whether the Americans will, fine-tune this and say, okay, this money will go here and will go here and will go here. We're still disputing all that. That's the debate that's going on in Islamabad. Part of the reason when you have 300 people working under Robin Raphael in Islamabad trying to set up a system whereby all this money that is going to come in the next 5 years, where it has to go and how it has to be monitored and how it has to be accounted for, poverty is increasing. There's no money for anything. And if there is a new war scenario with India, then we've really had it. So we really need a quick injection, and we need to get the economy moving. That can only happen if the threat of and conflict of with India, that threat evaporates or diminishes, so that we get foreign investment. And of course, if we get the economy revived again on the basis of large doses of foreign aid and assistance, which is not happening right now. So, there is no real incentive even for Mr. Asif Zardari to say, okay, we'll do what you want us to do.
Way back in the back.
I'm Kashif Hasni with the RAND Corporation. Thank you, Najam, for another very explosive presentation. My question is a little on the non-traditional threat to security for like the water issue in Pakistan, if you can shed some light on that, especially vis-a-vis India and some internal water resource management problems. And if you can just join it with food and energy crisis we are facing, especially in the southern part of Pakistan, that is Karachi.
The most common refrain these days in Pakistan is that we're going to have water wars. We're going to have water wars with India, we're going to have water wars within Pakistan. And this is a very, very critical factor. It's a long-term factor. In the short term, you do get by, you get a good crop and a bad crop. The headline in a story on the front page of my paper today in Pakistan is about India and Pakistan building two dams, each trying to build it faster than the other on the same river. Because under the terms of the Indus Water Accord, whoever does it first will get certain benefits and so on. And the rhetoric on water is getting more and more bitter and acute. And for 2 years we've been trying to talk to India in terms of a resolution to this conflict over the building of an Indian dam over Jhelum. And now the Kashmiris are getting into the act. First it was India, Pakistan, now the third party has come in and said, hey, India, Pakistan is fine, we Kashmiris in Kashmir, we need to be a party to this conflict also. This is our water. It's getting more complicated, which is to say that the Kashmiris in India are no longer, they're not pro-India and they're not pro-Pakistan anymore. They're more for Azadi, which is to say even the old pro-India parties are now having to take a very independent position on some of these issues, and including water. So water is going to become a very major issue in the next 3 or 4 years. And if we don't solve some of the more outstanding issues and create the trust that is needed to either get the World Bank in at the first opportunity or not get the World Bank in at all and do it ourselves. But neither of that is happening currently. So that's a very, very critical area. Second, of course, is because, the threat is, we're going to die without water. I mean, that is something far more powerful than all the rhetoric about Mumbai's and this, that, and the other. And, the upper riparian versus the lower riparian. You have the same problem inside Pakistan. We want to build a dam. We can't build a dam. Why? Because the lower riparian, Sindh, says nothing doing. They don't trust Punjab province. Pakistan doesn't trust India. India doesn't trust Pakistan. And water is the lifeblood of Pakistan, much more than it is that of India. Because, it's the land of the 5 rivers, Punjab, that is the granary. And so I think, we are having internal problems over distribution of resources. The National Finance Commission Award can't get our act together. The provinces are fighting over resources, over sales tax proceeds, over the measure of autonomy that we need. That's another challenge that we face. I didn't talk about it, but I'm glad you pointed it out. And then, of course, if you link that whole process of regional autonomy, including resources, command over resources, the Northwest Frontier Province is asking for royalties. 200 billion rupees they're asking for royalties in past supplies of water and hydroelectricity. The government doesn't have money to import oil and pay its oil companies so that we can get back to 2 hours of power outages instead of 12. And the Northwest Frontier Province is asking for 200 billion rupees. There's no money. And so, this is the problem. When we want to build a dam, when the international community and others want to give us money for projects such as these, there's no domestic consensus. And on top of that, you have the Indo-Pak problem where there is no consensus either. So this is a very critical area. It could override many other issues in the next 2 or 3 years.
First hand up was over here. This lady here. Yeah, that one. The one with a smile on her face.
Hi, I'm Natalie Park with the Century Foundation. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about the situation in the Swat Valley for the displaced and returning citizens. And also, from a media perspective, can you speak a little bit about whether you think the information that's coming out is accurate and adequate? And if not, what do you think the ramifications of that are?
Well, very quickly, we thought the refugee problem, the displacement problem was going to be really huge. Everybody thought that. In the event, it hasn't turned out to be so huge. I think the writing on the wall was that, A, the army might not move against the Taliban, in which case it would have become huge. But the army did move, and the refugees did decide to go back. And the army is now making commitments that it's there forever, it's not going to go away. It's going to build cantonments, and it's going to stay there and protect the people. So the writ of the state is back. For the first time, actually. It's not back, it's there for the first time. So that's a good thing, which is, part of the solution to the refugee problem. The second thing is that the money didn't come. 550 million were pledged as immediate assistance, out of which only a couple of hundred million have come, and that too only from the United States. And pittances from here and there. Most of the refugees were taken care of by fellow Pakistanis. They ended up in homes, and now with the weather becoming better, their condition is getting better. The government also put out, originally it said it was giving them 5 billion, now it's gone up to maybe 15 billion. So the Pakistani population, the government of Pakistan, the Pakistani army's action, the hospitality of the Pakistani people, all have served to, in a sense, diminish the refugee problem. But it's still there, it's still a big problem, and winter is going to be another problem, because if there is a resurgence of Taliban activity in the winter, then there could be really huge problems.
I'll get to you, Howie, in a minute.
Thanks. My name is Rana Fawad. I'm a freelance journalist. Najam Saab, I have attended many think tank functions here, Pakistan related. I haven't seen a single Pakistani visitor, from Dr. Hoodbhai to Sherpao, who didn't say that drone attacks in Pakistan are counterproductive. What is your opinion on that?
First of all, the Pakistani army, the Pakistani government, and the United States have a policy on these drone attacks. The policy is that the Pakistanis will protest, but they welcome these attacks because they do take out valuable targets. Number one. Number two, officially the Americans don't say that they're sending the drones into areas that are Pakistani sovereignty. As far as the people of Pakistan are concerned and the media of Pakistan is concerned, they're anti-drones. Genuinely so, because there the question is of honor. There the question is of sovereignty. Their abstract issues are important. They're not important to the government of Pakistan or to the Pakistani army, which is facing a situation on the ground. Of course, governments use public opinion and media opinion to try and extract concessions. And to that extent, when you hear Mr. Zardari and the Pakistani army say that, hey, give us the drones, let us press the buttons, makes sense, okay? But they know it's not going to happen. They know the drone strikes are going to continue. And now even the Pakistani public is becoming a little cynical of the whole thing, especially since it was an American drone that took out Baitullah Masood. And the whole theory that Baitullah was an American agent or an Indian agent and the Americans were not helping, all that has been blown away now. The media does talk about drone attacks, but it's not with the same insistence and emotionalism that they did earlier. The cynicism has set in, and people now have accepted the fact that this is going to happen. It's going to be selective, but it's going to happen, and the Pakistani army and government are complicit in it.
Howie, I said I promised you the next turn.
I'm Howard Schaefer of Georgetown University. Najam, you've talked a great deal about the importance of conflict resolution between India and Pakistan as an ingredient for better handling of the regional issue. But I'd like to get some speculation on your part as to what that means. On what basis would relations be improved, conflicts resolved? Do you have anything in mind other than getting the Indians off your back on post-Mumbai? What are you going to do about the big issues what can a Pakistan government, admittedly quite a weak Pakistan government, do by way of offering concessions, which it would have to do in any meaningful conflict resolution?
The thing is that I think the Pakistani government, opposition, and military establishment has already made the biggest historical concession it could make to conflict resolution with India. And I date it back to the 99th summit between Nawaz Sharif and Vajpayee, when they started talking about the Chenab formula on Kashmir, which was very far removed from the UN resolution idea. Musharraf denied it to begin with and then went back on it, and his out-of-the-box thinking led to another back channel that came very close to the same sort of thing, ending in a joint mechanism. The areas that are part of Pakistan become part of Pakistan. Those that are part of current Kashmir, excluding the valley, become part of India. Some adjustments along the river Chenab on the west and on the east. As it so happens, the Muslims are on one bank and the Hindus are majority on the other bank. So India doesn't even have to say that this took place on the basis of religion, because as it so happens, the geography is such. What more, could India ask for? This is exactly what India has always wanted, to sort out Kashmir internally. And today, the whole notion, the Kashmiris have made it absolutely clear that they don't want to be part of Pakistan. What Zardari has done in the northern areas is the first step in that direction, which is why the Kashmiris in Kashmir, the hardline Kashmiris in Indian Kashmir, are angry. Yasin Malik just gave a statement, Havi. He's totally opposed to what Zardari has done by incorporating the northern and giving the northern areas a degree of autonomy. This is the first step to incorporating it as a province of Pakistan, and Azad Kashmir as a province of Pakistan. And if not, then the whole notion of a Kashmir with a joint mechanism, which is what the 5 points are all about, which you're aware of. All India, you can see it and sign this in a year's time, provided and both Congress and the BJP were on board. Half the back channel took place under one regime and half the back channel under another regime. In Pakistan, half the back channel under Nawaz and half the back channel under Musharraf. Zardari wants to get on with it. Zardari is keen to keep the same back channels. He doesn't mind. He's asked Tariq Aziz to carry on. Tariq Aziz is sort of hemming and hawing. But on the Indian side, you have Mr. Lamba, and you have the new National Security Advisor who's part of it. So it doesn't require much to get back on track, which is the whole point. Kashmir is nearer to a solution today than it ever was. Ever was. The question is, India has to take that initiative. The Kashmiris are ready for it. I was in Kashmir last year, and I was struck by the enormous support in Srinagar and its environs for Musharraf. I was shocked. I said, what? They said, we hope he has a long life. I said, what are you saying? He said, yeah, he's given us breathing space. This war has been terrible. We don't want to be part of Pakistan. Musharraf's out-of-the-box thinking is right. So Nawaz wants that. He initiated that process. And the People's Party initiated it or thought about it in 1989. So what more does India want? The fact that the UN is out of the loop, the fact that Ladakh can now become an Indian state, the fact that Jammu can now become an Indian state, and the valley and certain areas of Azad Kashmir, you have a joint mechanism for an X period of time without diluting sovereignty, India's sovereignty or Pakistan's sovereignty. I think the solution is there. So the point I'm making is this. We need to get back on that track. We need to solve the water problem. The water problem we brought in the World Bank. The World Bank gave a judgment. India and Pakistan are both dragging their feet over it because the ball's in India's court. Okay, what about Siachen? We all know the deal is done, but Siachen won't happen until the rest of the things happen now. In the old days, Siachen was first on the agenda. Now it's not first on the agenda. My own assessment is, in a perverse sort of way, the item that was supposed to be last on the agenda, which was Kashmir, from India's point of view. From India's point of view, it should be first on the agenda now. Pakistan has conceded more that it could conceivably have in very difficult circumstances. And there's a consensus in Pakistan. Nawaz Sharif, Asif Zardari, Pervez Musharraf, the army, they all want this settlement on these lines. What more does India want?
Back in the corner.
Mr. Sethi, I'm an Indian Muslim, and you have been talking a lot about India. You gave a very bleak picture of Pakistan, and I wonder how, I don't wish to offend you or other Pakistanis or anyone else here, that the Indian Muslims decided, at least my parents decided to stay in India, and considering what Pakistan has conducted itself in the past 60 years, we are in a way happy to be in India rather than in Pakistan. My question to you that you have not said a word about the Mahajir party. What is their role? There is a lot of internal strife within Pakistan. You have talked a lot about the external threats, but what about the threats within the ethnic strifes or the treatment of the Mahajirs by the Punjabis or the Sindhis? Would you throw some light on that?
Yeah, but with due respect, and I don't want to get into a debate here, with due respect, I'm not sure whether your point of view of the state of the Indian Muslims is the point of view of a majority of the Indian Muslims. And I can only refer to a government report published recently in India that says that the state of Indian Muslims is terrible. It's as bad as that of the lower castes, and that is certainly not the fate that should have befallen a community that is at least 25% of the Indian population. So I don't want to go beyond that. I'm just throwing back at you what the Indian government's report says about the status of Indian Muslims and how, in a sense, if Pakistan's ideology has disproven the need for partition, the state of the Indian Muslims today is evidence to the contrary. So having said that, if you'll allow me to talk now a little bit about the Mahajirs. Well, you know, Karachi is the Mahajir city, and Karachi is now split three ways. And Sindh is split three ways. You have the Mahajirs, you have the Sindhis, and now you have a huge Pathan influx, Pashtun influx. And 1/3 of Karachi is now Pashtun in an interesting way. So that is a cultural mix that is both good from one point of view and potentially dangerous in the case of if there is ethnic strife. So, you know, beyond that, what can one say about Karachi? It is still the hub of Pakistan's industrial growth. There is peace. There is an attempt for the first time between these three ethnic communities that have been warring with each other to build peace and to build the rules of the game in that city. And that has been demonstrated reasonably well. The city has been free of ethnic conflict for a long time now. Terrorism, bombs going off, occasional this, that and the other, that happens all the time. But the sort of ethnic conflict that we saw in the 90s, that is certainly not there anymore.
Oh, we got some more questions on the left.
My name is Vijay Saswal. I'm from Indo-American Kashmir Forum, born and raised in Kashmir. But my question is more general, actually. It's more of a comment. Mr. Sethi, I've heard you over the years, coming over here sometimes with Jignu and all that. Always enjoyed your presentations. But today I'm really both surprised and disappointed. I have never seen you as an apologist for the Pakistani government as I see you today. I'm sorry, but I'm giving you my frank assessment. I don't see a difference one bit between the official Pakistani spokesman and you. Would you comment on that, please? Thank you.
The official Pakistani spokesman will not say Mr. Zardari in his first year has been a total disappointment. That the official spokesman will not say.
Not keep his job.
The official Pakistani position will probably rubbish Nawaz Sharif, which I have not done. I've talked about Pakistan's national interests. The thing is, it is in Pakistan's national interest to keep the army out. The army, I mean, you know, I've always said that, and you will bear me out. I've today made a very forceful case for keeping the army out. The fact that I have focused a little bit on India, I don't think you like that. But unfortunately, I've always said that it takes two hands to clap. I said to India in 1999 that Nawaz Sharif is your best bet to build peace because of the summit. I was having difficulties with Nawaz Sharif in Pakistan because I was trying to expose his corruption. But I went to New Delhi and I said in New Delhi that India's best bet is to get this Lahore summit moving. Nawaz is your best bet. That is the same Nawaz which promoted the jihad and had been an army spokesman. I said that at that time. I say it today. Your best bet is the civilians of Pakistan. But you know, you can't have it all your way. At the end of the day, there is a public opinion, there is a historical memory, religion, politics, and the fact that we are neighbors is important. And you know, if you really want to be a big brother, you got to act like one.
There was a hand up wail in the back there. And then who else? John.
John Lawrence. One regional power that you haven't mentioned, which had historical associations with Pakistan, and I'd be interested to hear your views about their current activities, is China. And I wonder if you might comment a little bit about their current influence in Pakistan and their role, if they have one.
Well, very briefly, in 1996, the then president of China came to Pakistan. And in a conversation with the then president of Pakistan, Mr. Farooq Lagari, to which I was privy, I happened to be a member of that interim arrangement, the Chinese president categorically and clearly told the Pakistani president, hey, settle your disputes with India. Kashmir is a border issue, settle it as a border issue like we've settled all our issues. You couldn't get clearer than that. The Chinese have always been very pragmatic. The Chinese don't give Pakistan money, but they do help in projects. They do help in transfer of technology, including military technology. But the Chinese have also built a strategic relationship with India, and Pakistan is not unaware of that. The Chinese are Pakistan's preferred trading partners, because India is not. If India were, then the Chinese would be at a disadvantage purely because of the geographic distance. Because some Indian goods are cheaper or as cheap as Chinese goods. But right now, Indian goods don't come into Pakistan for various reasons, and the Chinese have taken over the market. In a strange way, something very interesting is going on. One, when the Chinese come in and bid for Pakistani projects, the media is extremely reluctant to point the finger on corruption. Because the Chinese are not averse to the usual business practices. But the media will not talk about Chinese kickbacks. The media will not talk about non-transparent arrangements between the government of Pakistan and the government of China on private power, on projects. So the Chinese, in a sense, always have the advantage of jumping the queue. And if the Americans or the Japanese or anybody else is competing for a tender, all other things being equal, the Chinese are going to get it. So that's the advantage China has. Number two, the Chinese are the only ones who've actually thrown in physically manpower to help build some of these projects at times and in areas where there's conflict going on. The Chinese have been kidnapped, held for ransom. The Chinese are undertaking huge risks in doing this. And to that extent, the government of Pakistan is very responsive to them. The third thing is that the Chinese are very big with projects. They come in with projects, build, operate, and so on. And they're talking to the Pakistanis on power projects. Our president has been to China, to the Three Gorges, talking to those companies to come in and build a string of dams, small dams in Pakistan. That sort of money, that sort of commitment is not coming from any other country in the world. And so therefore I think China retains a special edge in terms of Pakistan's economic development and military security. But in a perverse or a strange sort of way, Saudi Arabia maintains a very strong influence in Pakistan politically, even though Saudi Arabia gives very little economic assistance compared to, say, the United States. Yet Saudi Arabia maintains a very, very significant clout in Pakistan. And now especially, the Saudis are pushing for a solution in Afghanistan, sometimes in conflict with that of Pakistani national interests. And yet it's difficult to thwart the Chinese. The Chinese are anti-Taliban and anti-Al-Qaeda for obvious reasons. And the Pakistanis are playing, have to play a far more delicate game over here. They're anti-Al-Qaeda, but not necessarily anti-Afghan Taliban. So there are sources of conflict built into the Pakistan-Saudi relationship. But at the end of the day, the Pakistanis are very sensitive to what Saudi Arabia says or does, just as it is on China. China does not meddle in Pakistan's internal affairs. The United States does, Saudi Arabia does, in a perverse way in terms of the proxy wars, so does India. But China doesn't do that. So China only enjoys a great deal of goodwill.
John, you had a question?
Yes, John Schmidt, George Washington University. There was a very interesting editorial in the Daily Times on September 4th about how dangerous it had become in Islamabad. And one sentence will suffice. The truth is that the city has become Talibanized among the lower classes that outnumber the rest of its population. I wonder if you could comment on what the significance of this phenomenon is, whether it exists elsewhere in Punjab, and relate it to the growth of radical mosques and madrasas throughout Punjab, and then add in the influence and potential threat added by groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which I note in a New York Times article about a month ago quoted an ISI official as saying that it was 150,000 strong now, and they were really afraid to move against it. Other groups like the Jaish-e-Mohammed. What is basically the threat to the state posed by this phenomenon in Punjab itself?
Well, you know, John, Islamabad became, in a sense, a transit stopping point for Punjab Taliban and the tribal Taliban, which is what the Red Mosque was all about. It happened under the watch of the ISI, so the ISI and the military can't escape responsibility for it. The people who were in the Red Mosque were known to the ISI, had been their agents, had been their assets. And every government had been soft, not wanting to take on a hornet's nest. That's been the philosophy. That's still the philosophy vis-a-vis the Taliban. Talibanized elements or madrasa elements who are potential recruits for the Taliban in southern Punjab. It's a hornet's nest. We don't have the security apparatus to deal with it. So to deal with these so-called former assets who are now liabilities, nothing less than a full-fledged military will be needed. And you saw what happened in the Red Mosque. The use of the military antagonized the population of Islamabad. It antagonized the population of Pakistan. It antagonized the media. And Lal Masjid, that symbol, the Red Mosque, became a symbol of the downfall of the Muslim League that was then the government. It became a millstone around their neck when the elections took place. Lal, the Red Mosque. And the opposition used it to great advantage, pointing out constantly that this party is the murderer, this is the party that did the Red Mosque. So, yes, I mean, you know, there could be close to 15,000, 20,000 madrasa students in and around the environs of Islamabad with total sympathies with the Red Mosque folk. It's a very dangerous thing. I remember an occasion when maybe a few hundred armed miscreants created havoc in the city of Lahore, and the police could not do anything. Something had happened, and I forget now what the occasion. The Danish cartoons. And we knew that these were madrasa students, Jamaat-e-Islami and other jihadi forces. Few hundred people. And Lahore was like a ghost town. The police was nowhere in sight because they are better armed, they are better motivated, and they're ferocious. So the security, the police and the local security forces are not equipped to deal with these people. Which is why, you know, when India says go for the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Now I tell you, John, I've been to the Lashkar headquarters. And it is the most formidably scary sight. I mean, it's a nightmare, frankly. I mean, and you know, I don't want to tell a long story, but I got into trouble with the Lashkar. We wrote something, and you quoted something you could well have quoted out of an earlier Daily Times editorial on the Lashkar. And they basically said that they were going to get us. So we had to go and meet Hafiz Saeed to apologize. And neither the government of the day nor the ISI, nobody was prepared to mediate on it. Not going to touch it. You guys go and make your peace. The chief minister said, I'm not in touch with them. And the chief minister wanted to help me. So we had to find ways and means of getting in touch with these guys and go and apologize. And you know, that whole complex is built like the mosque in Medina. And the folk there are out of another world. And if 5,000 of those folk decided to come out tomorrow in defense of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, okay, there would be no police. Nowhere in sight. They could take over the city. Lashkar has to be dealt with in terms of a long-term solution. Many steps. Part disbanding them and reorienting them, partly bribing them, giving them jobs, partly crushing them and selectively picking up their leaders and doing it. It's going to be a long drawn-out process dismantling the Lashkar. It's not going to happen overnight. And the Pakistani army is not equipped right now What with the eastern border, worries about another Mumbai, the internal problems on its western borders, Pakistani army is the last force that is now going to say, okay, we're going to finger the Lashkar, we're going to go after them. No way. It's not going to happen. Therefore, when India says act against Hafiz Saeed, it's asking for something that is not possible in the short term. It's a long-term issue, which is why we need to build the trust and confidence that enables the Pakistan security agencies to move in terms of the long-term perspective.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's after 4:30, and we promised to end the meeting at 4:30. I'm willing to stay for another 3 hours if everybody wants to, but I'm sure that there are a number of you who probably, despite this wonderful hour and a half we've had, probably wouldn't stay for that long. So, do you want any more questions, or are you tired? Is there anybody who feels that they have to ask a question before we draw this to a close? Today becomes...
I have to ask a question.
Today, yeah, I mean, you know, it might turn out to be...
Oh, yeah.
Jugnu, you are the preferred questioner of all time.
I keep asking you this.